Die Hard 2 was directed by Renny Harlin and once again starred Bruce Willis as John McClane, that cop we all know and love from the first action classic. Once again on Christmas, McClane is dealing with a group of terrorists who have taken over an airport. They're not letting any planes land, so there's tons of them circling overhead. One of them has his wife Holly on board. So McClane is dealing with the terrorists as well as a bunch of airport operatives that don't seem to give as much of a shit as they should. So like I said earlier this summer when I reviewed Back to the Future, I want to talk about some films this summer. I want to talk about some classic films. I want to talk about some films that are parts of series. They're not necessarily classics, like this one in particular, but I'd like to fill in those gaps of films that I haven't reviewed on my channel. I've already reviewed the first Die Hard, and I've of course reviewed the newest one, but I've never done singular in-depth reviews for 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to do those over the next few weeks. Should be fun. Before Die Hard 5 came out, the film that I like to pretend doesn't exist, Die Hard 2 was always my least favorite. It's not that it's bad. It's just the one that I think has aged the worst. It's a bit cheesy. It has a lot of really obvious dubbing. Speaking of dubbing, this movie is famous for having one of the worst edited for television versions of a movie.
We don't need any Monday morning quarterbacks.
Hey, forget Monday morning. My wife's on one of those damn planes these guys are fooling with. That puts me on the playing field. And if you'd have moved your fat feet when I told you to, we wouldn't be hip-deep in snow right now.
Come on, McClane, just a few words.
Okay, just a few words.
Joe.
Off.
Ranch boys are gonna kill bitch and get it from him.
Gonna do that. They're gonna get the same damn plane and take off with him.
Get the hell out of here.
I mean, when the Army can't do it, he must have loaded that unit with his own men.
Are you nuts? That firefight at the house.
Sideshow to jerk us around 5 times.
That stupid, arrogant psychopath.
It's all over the airport.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon? An edit that bad could only exist in the 90s. I mean, these voices sound nothing like their actor counterparts. Bruce Willis is still great as John McClane. You can tell that if McTiernan had directed this film instead of doing The Hunt for Red October, this would have been a much better movie. Renny Harlin is not a bad director in this movie. It's just that there isn't that much that's innovative about it. This is an entertaining action movie where the first film had so much under the surface that you could really glean from and appreciate, while also being a badass movie. But at the very least, McClane still feels like McClane in this movie. He's the everyman. He's that vulnerable hero that we all feel like we could be if we were in this situation and forced to deal with what he deals with. We hope that we can deal with it the way he does. The villain this time around, Colonel Stewart, played by William Sadler, is pretty basic. He's nowhere near as captivating as Alan Rickman was as Hans Gruber, nor is he as good of a villain on the page. He has a plan that he executes fairly successfully throughout the entire movie. What made the first Die Hard so riveting was that Hans Gruber also had a plan like that. But Bruce Willis, as John McClane, comes in and fucks everything up, and so you get to watch that perfect plan go to waste. But here everything goes mostly to plan for Colonel Stewart, which is interesting because you have the villain on top of things for most of the movie, and McClane is always trying to run to catch up. That's a good thing for the character, but it doesn't really do that much for the hero-villain relationship. In fact, they don't interact that much as characters even. In the first film, McClane was always on the walkie-talkie with Hans, and eventually they actually met. In this film, McClane and Stewart barely have words, and when they do, it's always really quick and fleeting. He's definitely not the weakest villain in the series, but he's certainly no Jeremy Irons either. Also, his introduction is kind of hilarious.
Years ago, General Esperanza led his country's army.
What the fuck? But the action scenes in Die Hard 2 are mostly very entertaining. I love the old-fashioned blood squibs. All the shootouts look really good. There's some stunts that don't quite make sense though, like why does McClane just kind of hop on a bike and then tackle a guy? What was the point of the bike? He could have just ran into the guy, and it's like they saw a bike and were like, oh, stunt with the bike, but he doesn't... Why did he do that? Where this movie really works for me is the way they position McClane throughout this airport. He's always forced to prove things to people who don't want to believe him. They're the worst airport security team on the face of the fucking planet, but it makes the movie much more entertaining. He has to go underneath the airport, get help from a janitor. He has to try to convince everyone that something's really happening, and so when he's out there on the runway trying to get this plane's attention before it crashes, that's a really riveting moment. And the death of all those people was handled really well. It didn't feel like some cheesy 90s action element. When you see McClane remorseful about not being able to help all those people, you feel the pain that he's feeling. This movie, just like the first, maintains one of the most important things about the McClane character. A lot of people like to talk about the fact that he's just a regular guy and he spouts one-liners, but he's also a police officer, and he is a good police officer. He cares about people. He actually wants to help people. The fifth film in particular, which I've talked about in the past, just made him guy with gun who didn't give a shit about civilians, stole people's cars, drove over the tops of cars that had innocent women inside of them. The good Die Hard films understand that McClane does give a shit. He really does care about people, and when he's not able to save people's lives, that hurts him. I also really love the sequence where McClane confronts these terrorists at a church, and he discovers that he's firing blanks, and you start to realize that there's this conspiracy going on with this new team that was sent to supposedly help them out, but in reality, they're all just in on it together. I also like that he fucking kills a guy with an icicle. But there's aspects of this movie that never really worked for me in the past, and watching it most recently today, they are compounded. They bring back the horrible, annoying news anchor from the first film, which was easily the worst part of Die Hard. They would often cut back to this news anchor, and his entire character's purpose seemed to be to get Hans to realize that McClane and Holly were related in some way. They brought him back in this movie for a much more extended role, which was a major mistake. He's on the plane with Holly. He, again, is this terrible reporter who just wants a story, who wants to get attention for himself and doesn't care about all the lives he's endangering, and he drags down the pace considerably. There's also an older lady on this plane with a magazine in her purse with a Lethal Weapon 2 ad on it, which I always thought was kind of funny. And I always ask myself, how in the hell did she bring a taser onto a plane? I don't know. But it creates a moment that's really funny.
If this should be my final broadcast.
Amen to that.
It's not that the first Die Hard was super realistic or anything. I mean, all of these movies ask us to believe unbelievable scenarios in some way. But this movie sometimes strains the boundaries of credibility, like this scene with grenades that are thrown at McClane inside of a cockpit. The fuse on these grenades lasts for around 30 seconds. He has time to watch all of them land, get inside of a chair, strap himself in, watch more land, and then eventually launch himself out. I know I'm picking on this movie a lot, but it's because there's a lot of little things about the movie that have always bugged me that I wanted to talk about. I watch this movie every few years when I feel like watching the Die Hard movies. I've seen it probably 10 times in my life. Obviously, I own the Blu-ray, so I enjoy watching the movie. It's just that I don't think it's aged that well. It doesn't feel as special as the first one did. It feels like a basic action movie, but it's definitely enjoyable in that way. I wish there was more Powell in it too. I want more Reginald VelJohnson. I understand that he's at an airport in a different place, but the thing that works about this movie and the thing that saves it for me is Bruce Willis as McClane, what they do with his character. He feels like McClane should feel. He's always trying to prove himself to other people. He genuinely wants to help, and you can always tell that everyone around him is making that harder, which is why the character is so entertaining, along with the quips and one-liners. I like the whole fight with him on the plane at the end. It's kind of cheesy and very 90s, but it's entertaining. And I really love the idea that he lights this line of fuel that blows up the plane, creating a runway light for all the other planes. That's a great idea. Die Hard 2 is no doubt a massive step down from the first film, but it's definitely not a bad movie. It just has a lot of kind of cheesy things that haven't aged all that well, but I still find some entertainment value in it when I watch it. I'm gonna give Die Hard 2 a B-. Guys, look forward to my review of Die Hard with a Vengeance very soon. Thank you so much as always for watching, and if you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.